glad y'all are here. I'm glad that those of you who joined us online are here. This is a 5-week session, and what you have is week 1. There will be another handout next week. So, and as I've said a number of times, this is sort of a mixture between our conversation, and Karen, you're going to want to be able to sit, not with your back to the screen. Unless
I can see it.
Okay, all right. Conversation sparked by some video. Video is all of this priest who is now in Oregon by the name of Chris Martin. He wrote a book called With Gladness, Answering God's Call in Everyday Life. The book is not necessary. I did not buy them. If you really want one, you can go online and find one, but they aren't necessary. So that's sort of the introduction for where we are at this point. I don't know if everybody here knows each other, and so I would like to invite folks to do some introductions. And I see that there are several folks who are online. I'm going to ask you when we are done inside to also pop in and just tell us who's there. So not everybody's going to be able to be seen, because capturing everybody and the screen and all of this is difficult in this kind of setup. So anyway.
I'm Kip Travis, active in men's group and the outreach committee.
I'm Nancy Acosta. I'm an occasional attendant here, so you may not recognize me.
Connie Badger. We're fairly new to Colorado, coming from Virginia, so we enjoy it very much.
I'm Paula Romming, and I occasionally come, but I definitely Zoom the masses at 7:45.
I'm Jim Wolf, and I'm the retired senior.
Not letting us forget.
Staying
I've
retired.
milked that for a long time. I'm Elaine Oxenberg. I've been here for a long time.
I'm Karen Elson. I've been here for probably 15 to 17 years, and I've been involved in all sorts of ministries.
And online, I see several folks. Andy, do you want to say anything? Can't tell.
There he is.
Well, let's make sure that they're not muted. The bar's down at the bottom.
He looks like he's in the best.
Okay. Should be funny. Try again, Andy.
Hi, I got this. Hi, this is Andy. I'm
Okay.
This is Andy. Yeah, I'm current senior warden, having technical issues and trying to get there to church to be vestry person of the day.
Okay. Beth?
And I'm Kim Norton, next to Andy Folkers. Hi, everybody.
Good morning.
Oh, Beverly, no speaker.
Well, Jim, you want to introduce your wife?
Who is it?
Your wife.
Oh.
No speaker. No speaker. Okay.
My wife is on there, and she's doing fine, recovering from.
Okay. All right. Well, what I'd like to have you all do is just spend a minute or two reading the introduction to session 1, which is right there, and then we'll get started. And it's in your booklet, or it's online. Everybody done? Anything else? Right. All set before I have these other things. Get this started on it. It was possible.
The first gentle practice is to remember a phrase and to say it in your mind from time to time through the course of your day. The phrase
So it's just the preview, you know, that's what happens in movie theaters.
Yeah, there we go, that's what I got.
Probably
Music is the same, that's why I was.
That says lesson 2.
That says lesson 2.
3.
Oh gosh, what is going on?
There we go.
There we go.
I'm here to talk about my new book, With Gladness, Answering God's Call in Our Everyday Lives. And this book emerged out of failure. I co-led a retreat a couple of years ago called the Pray, Worship, Serve Retreat, where a group of highly committed Christians, about 40 of us, looked at 7 core Christian practices. And we had 7 different discussions on each of those practices and deeply engaged conversation from everyone there around prayer, worship, service, reading scripture, and so on. But when it came to one of those 7, which was call, we went nowhere. And there were lay people and clergy, and they just couldn't get purchase on having a deep conversation about call in their everyday lives or in their lives as a whole. And this came after years of teaching many of these people, some in my congregation, some in other congregations that I'd visited, about the importance of Christian call. And that was a wake-up call to me. This wasn't working. The language wasn't getting through. Lay people said, that's not about me. Clergy people said, I experienced call when I went off to seminary, and it hasn't been all that relevant in my life since then. Everybody sort of intellectually knew that that wasn't quite the right answer, but they couldn't make it work. So, with the help of friends, I revised that Christian practice to have different language about what call was supposed to be about, and focusing on being sent in your day-to-day life. Now, I started to teach this in Nebraska, Indianapolis, and I was teaching it in Jacksonville, Florida, at St. John's Cathedral. And I was talking about some of the things that you're going to be encountering in this book. And at the end of my talk, or as I was presenting this content, my friend Kate raised her hand. She's the dean of the cathedral. And she said, my work this week, God is calling me to, is that my son is returning from college for summer vacation. My work is to set up the room above the garage so he doesn't have to sleep with his brother, and to set up proper boundaries so that we can have a healthy relationship through the course of the summer with a boy home from college. That's my work. After the talk, a woman came up to me with tears in her eyes and said, every time people have said anything before about call, vocation, or gift, I had something on the inside that said, that's not about me, that's not about me, that's not about me. After what you presented today, this is about me. So that's what I hope that these talks do for you, is that by the end of it, you really feel like this understanding of what God's call is about you and how you live your everyday life.
So, how do you understand the idea of God's call as we begin? Oh, snuck in.
It's amazing what I can do.
Speak up.
I think it's ongoing and renewing and different as you move through life. It's not the same as when you're 20 and embarking on your life and leaving your parents' home and going out into the world and building up your own life, as it is when you're 65 and changing focus. And even when you're 65, I think the call can be different week to week, month to month, depending on how willing you are to listen to the call. This is based on my experience.
I found a lot of times the call is something you recognize after you've gone through an event or something. It's suddenly, sometimes I miss what God's saying, and then, 2 or 3 years later, looking back, I go, okay, that was God's call. I just didn't recognize it.
I think for me, it's sort of something I can't not do. From very young, I believe I was called to teach. And I kept going into professions that weren't teaching professions, and they turned into teaching professions. So, I went into banking and ended up being a trainer. And that was not where I was going, but that's where I ended up, that sort of thing. And so I think it's interesting that I think call is what God puts on our heart. It's not what we choose to do, but the desires of our heart, I think our call feeds the desires of our heart, that God puts those desires in us. And so, I guess what I'm saying is that we don't need to be afraid that, oh my God, God might call me to go mission to the pygmies in Africa. Because unless God puts it in your heart to absolutely really love the pygmies in Africa and need to go and serve them, God's not going to do that. So I think sometimes people don't want to talk about call because they're afraid of what God might call them to do.
Yeah, I think that, sometimes the idea of God calling, thinking back when I was younger, it was a much bigger, it was going to be a life-changing, life-altering, you're left-handed, but now you should be right-handed, and everything's changed. And I think it can be much more down to earth, and like they were saying, something every day can be part of you can be experiencing a call almost daily.
I was struck, I've watched this several times, and I was struck by the dean of the cathedral saying, my call is to move my son into the garage. This week, that's my call. And to your point, Kip, I think that, what's different maybe about this approach is that my call this week is to do this. My call this month is to do this. It's not, I need to go to Africa. It's, I need to go to the garage.
I think we all have the capital C call as we decide what to do with our lives. But I agree with you. I think there are many lower C calls daily, all the time. And I guess, then decide whether this is what I should be doing right now, or should I drop everything and do that. And a lot of it is a matter of, for me, a matter of paying attention to my surroundings, and particularly people around me in very odd, unreligious places, in the line at the grocery store, or in traffic or whatever. But if I am paying attention, I will see things that require someone to step in or be there, if you will. So I do think you're right. I think there are many calls, if you will, or call with a lower C, and there are life-changing calls that can happen again and again at many different times in your life.
It's like, if you say, like the dean said, God has tasked me with this, or I have this task. Well, it somehow kind of brings it down from the elevation of a call, but it's still, it's still kind of holy work, and but you haven't labeled it a call, and so it kind of becomes a little bit kind of, I won't say demeaned, but it's been, it seems lower level, but it's still important.
I think maybe it's the answer to God, what's the next right thing to do?
There you go.
And that's a conversation that certainly can and should, I think, be ongoing. Given this circumstance, what's the next right thing?
And it can be the action of a larger call. Welcoming your son home means that you're called to hospitality, which can encompass a lot of things, but that particular week, it's for that person. So it can drill down on a larger call too.
Multi-level.
Yeah.
I wonder, in this conversation, do we diminish the daily stuff because we think it's not big enough? That God's not involved in the daily stuff. God's only involved in us going to Africa. But God's not involved in fixing the garage.
Africa, let's change that.
What's that?
Having gone to Africa, let's change that.
Okay, all right, well, Antarctica.
And I think when you were saying it sort of brings it down from the big C call, as it were, I think the opposite. I think it elevates what I might otherwise think as mundane work up to the level of holy.
My brother has turned out to be quite the Christian. It's kind of embarrassing. He lives in a marginal neighborhood, and around the block there was an encampment last winter of men trying to stay warm, and so he visited. I don't know if he felt called or what, but they were his neighbors, and so he went and talked to them, and what they needed was propane tanks to keep a central, one of those things that heats the
pillars.
Yeah, keep that going. And so he went back to his church of Friends Society, and they kept them supplied until the cops broke the neighborhood up. but just a call to go and be a neighbor, as a neighbor, they're living in your neighborhood, and just sit with them and find out what's going on. I don't think if I said that was your call, he would probably want to slap me, but there's, he wouldn't accept that as what he was doing, but it was.
invite you now to move along to read the bit on number 2, the gentle practicing. The reason I'm moving is because, well, for one thing, just in interest of time, but also we've distinguished between the big call, which sometimes doesn't seem really gentle, and what he has said already at the beginning is that he wants to sort of expose us to gentle practices. So move to this. Let's see if I can get this video to work more quickly.
Throughout this course, we're going to be focusing on 3 things that help make the gentle practices that I'm proposing real in your life: words, shifts, and repetitions. First of all, we're going to be focusing on the power of words. Several times throughout this class, I'm going to be suggesting that you focus in on a particular word. So, for example, in a couple of sessions down the road, I'm going to be asking you to focus on the word scent, and the word work, and the word gentle. Later on, we're going to be looking at more sophisticated words like acedia and conviction and enigma. And each of those are going to be words that I'm going to invite you to dwell with for the course of the week. This is because I believe in the power of words. Words help us be creative in the world and combine things and actualize things if we really focus in carefully on our words. The second is shifts. I'm going to be proposing a variety of gentle practices that shift the posture of your soul. Just as you go to a physical therapist or a chiropractor to help you have better physical posture, what I'm going to be inviting you to do is have better posture for your soul. Now, once, when I was teaching this material, I was several classes into it, and somebody was feeling a little overwhelmed with all the gentle practices. And I just asked her to imagine, like, if you're trying to improve your posture, you're not going to focus simultaneously on all the different things that you need to shift. You're just going to focus on one, putting your shoulders back, for example, and trust that everything else is going to then fall into place. So we're going to be focusing on small and subtle shifts, the way you walk through your ordinary days. The third is repetition. Many of these practices require you to, every time you're doing a certain thing, to do it in a slightly different way, repeating it over and over again until you really get the feel for it. For example, one of the examples I'm giving from my own life is how I worked on slowing down how I prepared breakfast. Every morning I had the opportunity to practice slowing down and being more intentional about how I create breakfast. The repetition mattered, and the repetition allowed me to slowly be more mindful and intentional about how I was doing that work, and understand that in that moment, that's the work that God was calling me to. All 3 of these, the words, the shifts in the posture of our soul, the repetitions, are things I'm going to be inviting you to enter into gently. The name of the thing that I'm going to be introducing through the course of these classes is gentle practices. Interesting side story. At first I called them playful practices, but I soon discovered that while all the guys knew what I meant, none of the women that I was teaching it to felt that it was quite appropriate for the depth of what this is inviting us into. And so I gradually learned to call them gentle practices. And gentle is precisely the right way to approach this. We don't grow through shame or feeling like we ought to do something. It's an invitation to try something, gently introduce it into your daily life. If you are doing it every day for a week, you may wake up the next morning and realize, like, gosh, I didn't do that practice at all yesterday. Fine. It's a new day. It's a new day to try and introduce the gentle practice into your life. And it's also going to be cumulative, and you're going to forget maybe practice number 1 by the time you hit practice number 4. That's fine. Finally, you're going to be drawn to some practices more than the other. The second time I taught this, I took a survey at the end, and there were 5 students in my class. Each of them chose a different one of the gentle practices as their favorite. So there's a real diversity of ways to enter into this work. So words, shifts, repetition, and enter all of it in a spirit of gentle practices.
My gentle practice is right now is to ignore the fact that he misspelled repetition. Do you believe the words have power?
Not most of the time.
You don't believe that they have power, or the
Not
words
most
don't
of
have
the
power?
time. I'm just saying words are words. And
Words are
but when you pay
expressions
attention.
of thoughts.
Pardon?
Words are expression of thoughts.
Sure.
So I think thoughts are very important. And hopefully God sends the good thoughts into your mind.
Well, he pointed out, of course, that the word playful, at least, I don't want to say it's a gendered word, but clearly his experience was that the men got it and the women didn't. So what words do we use, I think, is a challenge. I deal with that every week. Anybody who speaks in front of groups of people has to really consider how the words might be heard. You can't count for everything. Kip, you look like you.
Oh, yeah, words have power. I think you can choose words, you can choose language that can be very, if you will, demeaning, and you can also choose words that are elevating. And you can talk down to people in such a way that you can really kind of berate them, and then you can choose words that very easily, especially when you do it with little children. I mean, sometimes you don't have to choose words; you can just give them a look, and it's like, oh, So yeah, there's power there.
Talking about little children, I remember Mrs. McNall. Mrs. McNall was my 3rd grade teacher. And I remember going into her class the very first time, and she looked at us, and she didn't say class, she didn't say children, she said people. And that was a choice of a word that she used, and to your point about elevating or demeaning, I mean, we were all 3rd graders, but to be addressed as a person as opposed to a child made a huge difference in the way that I felt, and so, to your point there.
Well, some of us watched that Howard Thurman several weeks ago, and I forget which university he was at, but whoever was the dean or something at the opening of the school year or something addressed them all as gentlemen or something, and it was like they had not heard that type of address to them before. And it was like, he said, I think he said, it all kind of stiffened all of our backbones. So yeah, words got power.
Not all words.
No.
But recently at St. Anne's, my last year, we had to abandon boys and girls so that we could recognize the very wide spectrum of gender as possibility in the classroom.
Yeah, that's a big challenge, you know, it goes beyond that.
And it can be a challenge when people share a word bank, I mean, a language, but not a word bank. You know, like what this word means to me might not be what it means to you. And that, I think I'm being very clear about what I'm saying. Or I hear what you're saying and I think I understand, and it's like, wait a minute, what did you think that word meant? Oh, you know, so that can be difficult. Words can be puzzles.
In this time when we're trying to figure out all of this vast, a word that bugs me is siblings. And because I find it as a term of address, you know, my siblings, it just sounds so sort of clinical, you know, it's something that you would read in an anthropology book, you know, and so, but how do you get across something in such a way, and that's, you know, it's a challenge, and I just recognize that. So.
That's funny because I received that word as very warm and
Interesting.
inclusive. So
Yeah.
I have a totally different reaction. No, I mean, that's the power of words.
Yeah.
And that's what you're going to get in your audience.
Well, picking up on what he was saying about if you forget a practice or you miss something, what about the power of the word should?
So I've long said we all need to stop shitting ourselves. You know, I really think that is unhelpful and unhealthy.
It does motivate, though.
The what?
It does motivate.
How does it fit in thinking about God and issues of call? Is there?
I kind of relax about that because generally, if I really messed up, there's a 2x4 kind of experience.
It's what?
Say that again.
A 2x4 kind of experience.
What does that mean? I don't know.
Well, upside the head with a 2x4.
God will get your attention.
I'm sorry?
God will get your attention.
Oh. Yeah, I have a feeling, a yearning to have God come into my body or into my soul. It's always there, but I'm not sure he does.
I'm less unsure of that. Just not because I'm holier than you. It's just I'm a little more relaxed about it.
Yeah, it's fascinating how personality plays into this, you know, that there are those for whom the should gives a way for life to be lived, even to the fullest, because, you know, and then there are others kind of like, well, whatever, I'll move from point A to point B when it's time and I'll get there, and if I don't, well, that's okay, and, you know, so, but there's this personality thing in there rather than the harsh definition of should that you might find in a dictionary, appropriated a little bit differently.
Yeah, there's a difference between should and guilt and shame. If you can navigate a should that doesn't lead directly to guilt and shame if you don't, then I think it can be a healthy piece to help you. But I think if it's the door to guilt and shame, I don't know that that's a healthy place to go.
Well, as I get up, move to the next video, but I think in the context of gentle practices, is should a gentle word? Maybe that's what that's what he was kind of getting at when raising that question.
The purpose of the work that I'm inviting you into with these gentle practices is to increase the posture of your soul. So I'm going to be using not only metaphors of our body, but I'm going to be inviting you to put practices into your body. Some of the practices are going to focus on the eyes, others on the mouth. There's one later that focuses on a wound to the side. So we're looking at a real integration of body and soul throughout this. The first of these body metaphors is I want to invite you to put on your Camino boots and get them well worn. What I mean by that is one boot is the practice of prayer, the other is the practice of worship. About 10 years ago, I went on the Camino, the pilgrimage route across northern Spain. And like a lot of people who are about to become pilgrims, I tapped into lots of things, particularly online, of advice, how to become a pilgrim. And the one thing that every single website agreed on is the one thing you absolutely want to do is break in your boots before you hit the Camino. And so I did that, and my buddy, a couple months ahead of time, bought some new boots with the intention of breaking them in, but life happened, and he didn't do that. So we showed up for the first day of the Camino, and he'd hardly worn the boots before. Sure enough, by day 3, his feet were filled with blisters, and we were doing half the distance at half the speed until those boots were broken in, and then we cruised along just fine. These two practices of prayer and worship, if they're broken in your life, if there's something that you're used to, you're going to be able to go a lot further with these practices. If not, now's the time to start. And what I mean by that is prayer is daily prayer for 20 minutes a day. 20 minutes a day is not an arbitrary amount of time. Research shows that people who pray for 20 minutes or more a day have a much higher level of prayer satisfaction than those who pray less than that. Now, all I'm saying is 20 minutes. I'm not telling you at all what to do. That's between you and God. But setting aside 20 minutes, probably first thing in the morning to set the tone for the day, is an anchor of growing in these gentle practices. The other is weekly worship, and that just means going to church and connecting with your community. As you'll see, there are two prayers that I'm going to be teaching you. One is a prayer to pray every day. One is a prayer to pray every Sunday before you go into worship. So these two practices, these two Camino boots of prayer and worship, will not only anchor your experience, they will allow you to grow into them and really implement all of these gentle practices that I'm going to be introducing to you in the weeks to come. Let me say a word more about entering into the rhythm of praying every day. Again, 20 minutes first thing in the day is what is most likely to be successful for a prayer practice for most people. Further, I've been teaching prayer for over 20 years, and I've discovered that most people, as the baseline of their prayer practice, either do a 20-minute meditation sit in line with Thomas Keating's teaching or Martin Laird's teaching, or they do morning prayer from the Book of Common Prayer, which, if you do the entirety of the morning prayer with all of the moving pieces, takes about 20 minutes. Very often people will supplement either the meditation sit or the morning prayer with other things. That's particularly important if you're doing a meditation sit, because you want to add some scripture to that. Say one psalm a day, for example, starting with Psalm 1 in day 1, Psalm 2, day 2, and so on. And a little bit of scripture, slowly working your way through Mark or Philippians or following the daily offices. The point is to show up every morning and do that 20 minutes of prayer. The other thing that I've found that's incredibly helpful for people is to set aside a sacred space, create a sacred space where you live so that you have that space set aside just for prayer. And that can be anywhere as long as it's someplace calm, clear, where you can be in silence and do that prayer each morning.
So, do you pray every day? Is that boot one that you're going to have to break in? Is it, if you do, what does it look like? There's no should here, it's just a share.
Yeah, I like to work with day by day, and it's just simple, and it has readings in there, and I just try to follow that, on the various days, and it seems to work for me.
So forward day by day,
Yeah.
which, if you don't know, little booklet, it's out here. If you can't go out and turn left as you're going to go into the sanctuary, it's in a little basket right there. These are daily meditations put out by Forward Movement Publications, which is affiliated with the Episcopal Church, and there's meditation, but it also has the lessons from the daily office lectionary. Some people find that very helpful.
I do the readings, not every day, but from the Society of St. John the Evangelist.
You get those online, or do you have those?
Online.
Oh,
yeah. Every day. Every day it comes to me. It doesn't mean every day I read it. Most days.
I like contemplative prayer meditation. If I start to pray, I go right. I know this is personal, and the priest said, don't, everybody has their own way, but I would go straight into intercessory prayer, which I like to have the contemplative side, and then you can kind of move into prayer. Then I can move into prayer. And words. I don't want words at first, is what I'm trying to say.
I went to see my spiritual director last week and talked to her about something, and she said, well, if you talk to Jesus about that. I'm really text oriented. I pray through the text. And so I spend a lot of time, looking at text, figuring out, asking questions, all that kind of thing. And that's my conversation. But to have this sort of, well, this is an issue that you have. If you talk to Jesus about it, it's kind of like, well, now that you mention it, no. But there was an offer there. It was an offering to me from her to say, well, here's another way of thinking about it. And I thought that, he offered two very, very distinct, I don't want to say polar opposites, they can overlap, but two very, very distinct ways of entering into a time with God. And I think that, using maybe the language that I just did about the time with God and moving it away from prayer is different, because he sort of had this, let's have a little space in our house. Whereas for some people, it may be, I'm going to go for a 20-minute walk, or something like that. What about, most of you I see pretty often, so weekly worship is part of most of your experience. What happens if you, let's say you're regular, what happens if you miss a week? I'm just going to throw that, or two, or more. How does that hit you?
Yeah, I feel ungrounded. I can't figure out what day it is, it just, the week just doesn't flow. Unless it's a week where I'm intentionally playing hooky. Because once or twice a year I do that. I'm playing hooky this Sunday, and that's different somehow. And I don't really know why it's different. It's just maybe the intentionality. I don't know, maybe it takes away the should. You know, which I don't normally feel I should, but maybe it's that sort of acknowledgement that me showing up here on Sunday isn't a should, it's a want to. I don't know, I never thought of that actually till just now, but if it's not a sort of an intentionally planned absence, then it kind of throws my knees off. And it's interesting because there's something about our liturgy. I had a student that was singing a solo in his church some years ago, and so I went to hear him. And it was an evangelical thing that the minister walked out with his Coke can and sat on his stool, and I don't know what they talked about. And by the time we were done, it was like, oh, good, I have time to get to church. You know, I haven't been churched. Even though, you know, there were some nice things about the service, it didn't feel like, it didn't ground me. So it's interesting how rooted I am in the liturgy, I think.
This may sound strange, but I find that when I have a one-on-one conversation with somebody, I feel like I'm in prayer. And I enjoy it in that way. I had the opportunity to put ashes on children's foreheads on Wednesday at St. Anne's. And so I was at the gate after the service with ashes, and children came in and asked for them. And this little girl saw her Christian friend get it, and she said, would you draw a Star of David in the ashes on my head? And I said, I have no objection to it, but I think your parents might be upset.
Yeah.
But it was a charming conversation, honestly. It was just great. And turned out her father was actually at the other gate, probably. And probably could have gotten permission for that. I sure didn't want to send her home. I thought that was wonderful. That was just a God moment. That was perfect.
I'm going to show the last video just partly because we're running out of time, and it sort of feeds into what goes into the coming week. And now that I know how the rhythm of this works, I can talk with Nadine and we can figure out, you know, some of how to do the rhythm. Like I said, you've got all of the introductions to the videos. I'm not going to ask you to do that. That just takes up another couple minutes. But I want to give just a few minutes before we have to, which you're going to show this last thing.
The first gentle practice is to remember a phrase and to say it in your mind from time to time through the course of your day. The phrase that I invite you to say from time to time through the course of your day is, the work is very near you. And specifically, I invite you to say that when you're in a time of transition. So, the work is very near you is a slight alteration of a teaching of Moses at the end of Deuteronomy. It's his very last sermon. He is about to die, and he's not crossing over into the promised land. So these are his last words to his people. And what he says, I'm going to quote what it says in the scripture, but rather than saying what Moses says, which is the word is very near you, I'm going to add instead, the work is very near you. So here's my slight alteration of Moses. Surely the commandment that I am commanding you today is not too hard for you, nor is it too far away. No, the work is very near you. It is in your mouth and in your heart, and I'm adding, and in your hands. I have set before you life and prosperity, death and adversity. Choose life, that you and your descendants may live, loving the Lord your God. What Moses teaches about a word, I'm offering as a teaching about work. That the work is always very near you. Whatever work God would have you do next is right there to hand. What I'm proposing is that when you're in times of transition, for example, going out your front door, driving in your car, going up your steps to your office, for example, say to yourself, the work is very near you. Now, you may know what that work is. You may know what's going to happen when you open that door or park your car, or you may not. It may be something else unexpected. But whatever it is, the next work that God would have you do is very near you. Now, this can have make a real change in your life. Jacob, one of the people I taught this practice to, had a meeting. He was coming to the end of this particular job, and he was handing over more and more responsibility to his young colleagues. And his young colleagues were meeting with people that he had had previous experience with who worked for the city, who he knew to be very difficult. So he began the meeting with the young colleagues that he was handing the work off to, introducing them to these professionals from the city. And he thought, a marvelous job of introducing the two of them together, and thought, all right, I'm only going to be here for a couple more weeks. I can leave them be. So he made a lighthearted comment, went out the door, started walking down the hallway, said to himself, the work is very near you. And when he said that, he thought to himself, you know what? My work in that room is not done. I need to be there to be a calm, non-anxious, good-humored presence to help massage that new relationship. So because he said the work is very near you, he made a shift. And he turned around, went back into the room, made a lighthearted comment, and just sat there in the room, and the meeting went just fine. But the point is, remembering to say the work is very near you shifted what he was thinking and shifted the next action that he took. And he's utterly convinced that the work that God wanted him to do in that moment was to go back into that room. So times of transition happen throughout our days. The practice is to think the work is very near you and get into the habit of, when you're going through those times of transition, saying to yourself, the work is very near you, and allowing that to be an opportunity to think about, what is it that God would have you do next?
So there's a practice for the week. Does that change if you think about that idea that the work is very near you? When you walk out that door, or you walk out that door into your car, or all of those kinds of things. I mean, does that change the way, provide an opportunity for a shift, maybe? As opposed to, I'm walking out that door, I'm going to Safeway. Or that. So that's I think the direction to, it's an opportunity that he's offering, and that we'll return to next week just to just sort of debrief on. But any thoughts at this point before we have to sort of close down? You know, if does everybody have one of these? Oh, you do? Okay. Everybody? Okay. And Jim, take one home to Bev. And I'll give Andy one to take home to Kim. And I'll probably try and make these available online so that people who want to join us online can download it. But it's basically the same thing that we've been looking at, except that on the back, there are a bunch of other resources. Unfortunately, because it's a printed piece of paper, you can't click on them. So if I send the PDF out, you'll be able to click on the resource without typing everything in. Any thoughts or comments before we close up here?
I've developed over time what I kind of call my stoplight mantra, where I remember certain things and you know, try to get focused. One of the things that Elaine mentioned before is, you know, do the next right thing. And I think that's, the work is very near you, pretty interchangeable, so.
And what I was talking about, sort of living with that being prayer, is that.
It does require, I think, I hadn't thought about this at all, but it does require sort of an attentiveness, a paying attention to where you are and where you're going, but not controlling where you're going. You know, and that's a practice in and of itself, to just say, okay, I'm done here. Now I think I'm going there. But maybe I'll have to turn around and go back into the room. You know, there's that attentiveness, but just even saying, I'm leaving now, I'm arriving now. And is all of me here, or did I leave some of it in the previous place? Or, you know, something like, I really like that, because it does demand something. So that's the offering for the week. And, look forward to hearing how it works for folks. Thank you for being here. Thanks, Bev and Kim, for joining us, and we'll see you all soon.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.